He awoke, and Nipper pecking his ear, and just in time. His father's earliest word in the house was coming down the stairs. He scooped up his pigeon and crouched behind the sofa. When his father passed into the kitchen, he dashed up the stairs into his room. Glancing around, he saw no evidence of the night visitors. The window screen was firmly shut. Everything was in its place, everything except one thing, and he soon found out. He hadn't even had breakfast yet when the doorbell rang. As soon as he opened the door, he found himself facing a Nerf basketball curling around in Bean's fingers. Who's Nipper? Palmer couldn't think fast enough. Beans pressed the ball into Palmer's nose. Who wrote this? He did not want to get Dorothy involved. I did, he said. Who's Nipper? Palmer blurted the first thing that came to his mind. Me. It used to be my nickname when I was little. He looked at all of them. Before I knew you guys. Meadow stepped up beside Beans. We think Nipper's a pigeon. Palmer made a shocked face. Pigeon? What would I do with a pigeon? What would you do with that? Cereal and nachos that were in your room, said Beans. Palmer laughed, showing them how wrong they were. Snacks! I keep all that stuff in my room, so I have to come all the way down here to the kitchen. He wanted to kick himself for forgetting about Nipper's food. And where were you last night? Said Beans. It occurred to Palmer that he had a right to question him on his own. Where was I? Where were you? He glanced at Henry. Henry's face showed nothing. Where did you get my ball? Beans grinned. We came to see you last night. You weren't there, said Meadow. Palmer nodded. I know I was sleeping over at somebody else's house, my cousin. I wasn't here. Henry was staring at the sky. Palmer saw Henry for what he was, captive, strong enough to warn him about last night, but too weak to do anything except follow Beans. He saw in Henry something of himself, worse, what he could become. Beans scowled at the ball. Nat Palmer, you ain't Nipper, you're Snots. He dropped the ball on the ground, stepped on it. When he raised it from his foot, the foam ball reclaimed its roundness. Beans cursed and stomped on the ball with both feet, flattening it, grinding it into the sidewalk. For a full minute, he grunted in the effort, and again the ball popped back to shape. He kicked it away, then yanked on Palmer's arm. Let's go. We gotta find Farquhar. They found Farquhar in front of the deli, eating chocolate cupcakes and drinking Coke. Beans announced, pointing to Palmer. Birthday, boy, 10 years old. Slouched against the deli window. Farquhar took a swig of Coke. He switched it around in his mouth. He raised his upper lip, giving himself a rodent-like face, and then spit a thin stream of Coke between his front teeth, and the boys shot backwards. Farquhar peered at Palmer. Wringer, huh? Palmer did not answer. He needs the treatment, said Bean. Farquhar glared. You're rushing me. Bean spread his arms. No, I'm just saying. Farquhar bit a cupcake in half. Chocolate icing covered his teeth. What's it look like I'm doing? Eating, replied Beans tentatively. Eating breakfast, said Farquhar, washing down with a mouthful of Coke. The boys took another step back. You don't say nothing while I'm eating breakfast. You understand? All four boys nodded. They retreated to the curb, sat down on the street, not daring to even look at Farquhar. After a long time, they heard his voice. Okay. They turned. He was walking up the sidewalk. He got up and followed. He turned into an air shaft between the two storefronts. He went back to the alley. He stopped, backed away from them, making space. All their faces were grim. No one spoke. Farquhar pointed to the ground in front of him. He looked at Palmer and said, Step up. Palmer stepped up. Right or left? Left. Roll it up. He rolled up his left sleeve up to the shoulder. He blinked several times. He looked around. He rolled his sleeve back down. He took a step back and he shook his head. Farquhar's eyebrows pinched together in surprise. What? No, said Palmer. The word came out choked and dry. No, said Farquhar, chocolate crumb wedged between his teeth. No, said Palmer clearly this time. He heard shuffling behind him. No what? No what? Palmer moved away from all of them, facing them all. They stared at him, waiting. He saw the foot grinding the ball, the name into the sidewalk. He heard the scream. He heard it come split second before the others heard it. The scream that he knew now had been growing inside him for a long time. He planted his feet, bent his knees, and balled his fists and let it all come out all the way out. No, nothing. No treatment, no ringer, no snots. He thrust his scream at Beans. I'm not snots. My name is Palmer. My name is Palmer. He stepped back and hunkered down. No! Then he ran. Down the alley, down the streets, he ran like he had never run before. If Farquhar was with him, he would be caught. He knew that. But if not, he might be able to outrun the guys. He heard their sneakers slapping the pavement behind them. He heard their calls. You're dead meat, Snots! I'm going to get that pigeon of yours. I'm going to wring its neck and pull its head off. I'm pulling your head off. And he ran, and he ran. A bug crawled down the middle of his back. He tried to reach it. He wiped it off his shirt, ran faster, ran his fingertips up his spine. It wasn't a bug, it was sweat. The sun boiled in the cloudless sky. The dumpster he had slowly reeling in its shadow, so that he now had to sit with his back flat against it, his knees drawn up in order to remain wholly in the shade. The dumpster's metal flank felt cool and crusty against his bare back. His breath and his heartbeat had long since returned to normal. The noontime music of church bells had passed an hour ago, maybe two. He was hungry and thirsty, but he was also safe. The only other safe place was his own house, which was exactly 5.5 blocks away from this dumpster, behind the great grocery supermarket. A back door slammed. Out came a worker, dragging 2 hugely swollen black paper plastic bags. Seeing Palmer, he said, You waiting to help me? Was the man joking? He wasn't smiling. No, answered Palmer. With a grunt, the worker heaved one bag and then the other in the dumpster. He looked down at Palmer and wagged his head. Made in the shade. And he went back inside. 5.5 blocks. In his head, Palmer plotted his course that, except for the final half block, kept him in the alleyways. Even so, streets would have been crossed in broad daylight. In any way, the guys themselves took alleys as often as streets. They could be anywhere, around any corner, behind any parked car. They could be in front of the Greek grocer right now, asking people, Did you see a kid? They might have already spreading the word around. Palmer LaRue has a pigeon. He knew that if in fact had ever been a question, the question had now been answered spectacularly by his own actions this morning. The back door slammed open. The worker came out, but this time there was nothing in his hand but a can of Sprite. He popped it in front of Palmer and held the can down to him. It hadn't been opened. You look like you need this, kid. It occurred to Palmer that this might be some kind of trick, but he was too thirsty to care. He took the can and felt blessedly cold. He stared up at the man. He felt like crying. The man's lips almost smiled. On the house, he said, and then he was gone. Palmer snapped open the Sprite, drank the can empty, taking time only to gasp for breath. He lay his head back against the dumpster and closed his eyes. In spite of himself, in spite of everything, for a precious few seconds he felt good. His first idea had been to wait until dark, then make a run for home. The sun dropped below the roofline of the green grocer. He began to see that the idea was bad. Nipper would be coming home soon, and he would say they were not waiting for him, maybe even on the porch or roof itself, with stones and slingshots. Suddenly it was clear he had to get home before Nipper. Out, now. So he dropped the can and ran. Alley Street took him a faster way, driven by images of Nipper flying into a blizzard of stones. As he approached and turned into his block, it occurred to him that they might be waiting at his front door. It occurred to him that he might be his last minute on his earth. He slowed down and thought of Nipper and ran on. They were not there. He burst into his house. He wanted to collapse right there on the rub his face in the living room rug, but he did not stop. He took the stairs 3 at a time, flung open the door. Nipper was at the window, on the still outside the screen. Inside, sitting on his pillow, was a yellow pack panther facing the window, its head still as a statue, its tail sweeping slowly from side to side, having bothered look like at Palmer. The closest thing was a comic book. Palmer hurled it at the cat, hissed, screeched, leaped to the door and was downstairs before Palmer finished his scream. It was then that he opened the screen to let Nipper in, that he knew his pigeon must go.